Well, I just gave a big intro for everyone that's watching this later, and I forgot to record, which is just classic Adam. So we're starting now, and you don't get the intro. All right, so first question for Will is, this comes from a gentleman called Ido. And he said, Will, how did you get into diving? How did you get to the point where you decided to take on a world record?
There's two answers there. I got into diving when I was very, very young because I lived on a boat with my family. We sailed from Europe to New Zealand over the course of 5 years. When I was 2 years old, we left. So we were always in the water, snorkeling, playing. But that's just kind of recreational stuff, of course. And I got into it professionally as a sport when I was 23, and very quickly realized that it was something that I was very passionate about, that really kind of satisfied me on all levels, mentally and physically, as a complete challenge. And so that spurred me on to really dedicate myself to it, and to dedicate myself in particular to this kind of quest to define what is human aquatic potential. And I see the unassisted no fins discipline as the purest expression of that. So I've dedicated my career to trying to go as deep as I can, no fins.
Cool. Very cool. All right. Next question we have is, this is from a gentleman called Doug. He says, Will, hemoglobin is carries around, hemoglobin, it carries O2 around the body and carries CO2 back to the lungs. It seems like having more hemoglobin should be better. Does having higher hemoglobin content in your blood and in breath holding and freediving, does having high hemoglobin content in your blood aid in breath holding and freediving? And what can you do to increase it?
Yeah, good questions. It's one that there's been a lot of debate about, I think, in freediving circles. And we see hemoglobin, or your red blood cell count, as this kind of holy grail of training or of physiology, in that obviously the more red blood cells you have, the more oxygen you can store in your blood. And that in-depth freediving is kind of, it's like a free lunch. Like, you get the oxygen, but without the detriment of the volume change. So if you have a bigger lung volume, obviously you have more oxygen as well, but then you're gonna have to either strap on more weight at the start of the dive in order to compensate that, or if you don't put on the weight, then you're going to be using up energy at the start of the dive. If you do put on the weight, then you will use energy during the ascent. So the more we deviate from, like a fish is neutrally buoyant at any depth, and so it can just kick and glide no matter where it is. The more we deviate from that model by having a bigger lung volume, the more inefficient we're going to be in terms of energy expenditure. We're going to be wasting energy at some point during the dive. So lung oxygen is good, but it has a payoff, whereas hemoglobin is just free oxygen because it's incompressible in the blood, and so you have all the advantages of extra oxygen storage without any of the detriments. So yeah, it is something that we try and increase through training, but plenty of the top freedivers have chased these values and tried to increase their hemoglobin through training, through particular diet, like increasing iron, B12, folic acid consumption, those kind of things. And there's been mixed results. It seems like the body has like a set point that it wants to stay at for red blood cell count, and you can temporarily maybe raise that a little bit, but it doesn't want to change too much. The only kind of surefire way is through living at altitude. So living high up or in a hypoxic tent, and then training at normal kind of sea level. And that way has shown to increase red blood cell count. But yeah, there's been plenty of deep freedivers who have even seen their red blood cell count drop over the course of hard training periods in depth. And Berta Palazzari was one of the the first to note that, and he actually had a blood test done, and his doctor called him up and said, "Are you in hospital? Because your red blood cell count is like the lowest I've seen." And he said, "No, I'm going out to try a world record tomorrow." So it doesn't seem to necessarily correlate with performance. I've chased these values, others have chased these values, but we've done some of our best dives, world records, when hemoglobin, red blood cell count hasn't been that good. So I wouldn't, yeah, sure, make sure you get enough iron and B12 especially, and B12 is a really difficult one to get into your body, but don't kind of obsess too much about those values, I don't think.
Cool. Good answer. All right, this is from Alex, and he says, "What is your daily training routine, and how does it change as competition comes closer?" I know that's a very big question, so I don't know how you can answer
that. Yeah. The daily training routine, I don't even know. It changes all the time, and I'm constantly kind of making things up as I go. It's a work in progress, even after I've been training for, I don't know, 15 years or so. And also during the year, of course, it's going to change. So there's periods when I'm doing base training, which is mostly pull and kind of explosive strength training, as well as breath hold. So most of my breath hold training is done on exhale. So there's a lot of that kind of meat and potato stuff during the base training season. And then as I come into depth, more specific training, I'll start to do a lot of exhale dives, full exhale dives, and training tables in depth where I'm doing repeats of 30-meter dives with short recoveries to kind of build up my fitness in depth as well. And starting to do slightly deeper dives. And as I come closer to the dates when I'd want to compete at top level, then I taper off towards just doing deep dives and maybe stretching and a little bit of other training as well. But mostly, as in all sports, tapering towards higher intensity, lower volume of training. And that's, as a kind of a general map, seems to work for me. But in general, like a daily session might be some kind of stretching, body stretching, lung stretching, then pull training, and then in the afternoon, maybe some strength training. And I do it all kind of specific body weight stuff to target the muscles that are used for no fins.
Cool. Well, actually, there is a question that I had coming down later, but we may as well ask it now, which is, what are some of the exercises you do, like the strength exercises you do for dynamic no fins or constant no fins, so depth, both in depth?
Yeah, good question as well. So I've seen the best results when I target exercises that are obviously specific to the muscles we use in no fins, but also exercises that are explosive for a fairly high rep count, like an intermediate to high rep count. So to give you an example of that, rather than doing kind of super heavy squats for low reps, like 4 to 6 reps, I'll do, if any of you are familiar with jumping one-legged squats. So you basically go down onto one leg, and you can have the other leg like in a strap of a TRX, or you can just kind of cock it back behind yourself. It's not taking any of the weight. So you go down into a squat position on one leg, and then you push upwards just with that leg, of course, and try and jump off the ground. So it's a really explosive movement that doesn't finish kind of at the end of it. Doesn't get easy at the end because you're exploding and trying to jump off that foot. And I find that this kind of exercise, so all my exercises are mostly explosive, seems to develop a better capacity for power to weight ratio. So you don't necessarily want to bulk up for freediving, but you want to be able to generate a greater amount of power with the same bulk. And that will translate to being able to, for example, in no fins, swim at kind of 60 or 70% of your maximum power, but with still a really good speed of, in the pool, maybe 1 meter per second for dynamic fins, and in depth coming up at like 0.8, 0.9 meters per second. So that's kind of how I structure training for no fins. And yeah, the exercises would be stuff like jumping one-legged squats, or another one, of course, is pull-ups. I do those with an overhand grip, and I do them in a pike position. So you have your legs sticking straight out in front of you, and hold that position as you're pulling up and down. And so for some reason that not only gets like the back muscles and the arms in the pull-up, but it also gets your chest and your core and your abdominal muscles and probably your hip flexors as well. So it's a really powerful.
It's the beach muscles.
The beach muscles.
Oh yeah.
Not that that's why I'm doing it, of course, but yeah, it seems to benefit freediving as well. For example, like in the no fin stroke, right? When you do the end of the stroke, you should be really accelerating through the movement and closing with a strong triceps movement. However, if you have a good movement but you don't have good rigidity in the core, your body will bend like this, your torso will bend into that position, and some people exit from that by doing like a dolphin kick or something to compensate. Whereas if you have a strong core, then you'll be able to stay straight, and all of that power will go into forwards movement. And so doing the pull-up in this piked position is not only strengthening the muscles that you would use in an arm stroke, but you're also strengthening the core that you would hold strong during that stroke.
Cool. So this is a question from Maurice, and he says that one of the videos that's impressed him the most, like, you know, when he was starting freediving, was when you swim through the arch in the Daha blue hole. He basically just said, is there anything, like the video looks incredible. Can you just tell us something about that dive? Was it a really hard dive for you, or was it just like a normal, easy training dive, or what was it like?
It's interesting because I get a lot of feedback about that dive, that swim, that video. And some people even say that the reason they got into freediving was because they saw that video or were inspired by it, which is really, really amazing, humbling. And yeah, it was a beautiful dive, a beautiful experience. And it was difficult for a number of reasons, but mostly kind of in the anticipation of it. The actual execution of it turned out to be fairly straightforward. And I'd equate that dive in terms of difficulty to something like an early 70-meter no fins dive. So on the line, straight down and straight up. So at that time, I'd been diving to kind of mid-80s no fins, and I'd done a world record that year of 82 meters. So it was a step down in terms of difficulty, but it's kind of the psychological preparation was more difficult because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And I was fully prepared to actually swim in and turn around and come back out the way that I went in if I didn't feel that I was going to make it to the other side. And as I was preparing, in fact, I was like sitting on the beach watching the divers, the safety divers set up. I had a buoy on the inside and on the outside with lines going down. So I'd go down one line, swim through, come up the other side on the other line. And I was watching them set it up, and there was the buoy on the inside over here. And then I'd have to like turn my head, and a couple of 100 meters, it seemed, away from that buoy was the buoy on the outside. And so I was thinking, there's no way that I'm going to be able to swim that distance underwater at 55 meters, right? So I was like, no thanks. But I said, okay, I'll go down, see how I feel, have a look. And when I got out there, it was cold. I started shivering pretty much straight away. And so I was like, no, I'll just do a dive and have a look. But once I got down and started to go through, I realized that I was almost on the outside, and I was still feeling fantastic. And then as I was coming out, I really started to enjoy the experience, like to come out through this tunnel just to this kind of huge expanse of the most incredible blue water. And at the time I was diving with a mask, of course, so I was able to kind of drink in this experience and then find the rope and come up on the rope, and I didn't have any urge to breathe. I could enjoy it, look around. It was an amazing dive.
Cool. Well, so that actually leads to this question really well. And this is from Dan. And Dan says, as the only person to have done what you have done, who, if anyone, have you asked for advice?
Yeah, a lot of people. So, I mean, I'm constantly getting feedback, advice, ideas, whether they're solicited or not, from many people. Like I copy, I see what other divers are doing, and I'm like, oh, that's maybe a good idea. I'll try it out for myself. Yeah, you included, and so yeah, just kind of taking in all of that, those ideas and that data, and hanging on to anything that applies. But some of the people who I've gone back to over the years to bounce ideas off, because they have an understanding of freediving and physiology and everything that's happening that's kind of probably second to none. One person in particular is Eric Fatah, who's most of the current freedivers who are getting into the sport may not have heard of him other than just the method that he the equalization method in the mouthful. But not only did he pioneer the mouthful, which is most well known for, but there's maybe like 10 other different things that you're doing in freediving now that he was the first to do, such as wearing a neck weight. I think he was the first to set a world record for men with a monofin. He was the first to dive with a one-piece wetsuit and swim cap. And the list goes on. There's so many different things that he devised. So yeah, he's someone who I often kind of bounce ideas off, or if I have a problem that I'm working on, he's a good one for advice. But again, I've done that with almost everyone. So yeah, it's a kind of a open season, share everything in the freediving community. I think there's not too many people who are holding on to secrets.
Cool. All right. So this is from Mike. He says, has having a child changed your ability to push yourself and the limits of freediving?
It's, as you know, it's definitely a huge impact. It's the most kind of life-changing experience I think you can have, and so it's obvious that it's going to have some kind of an effect on a professional sporting career, especially one where there's an element of risk. It's not the most risky sport, but there is some. And I had a really bad incident last year that we're still working it out, and I'm actually hopefully going to do some scientific tests this year that will prove the strong theory that we have, that I had a blackout due to CO2 toxicity. So a very high concentration of CO2 during a dive in free immersion that was a couple of meters deeper than the current world record. And I'd never had a blackout under the water before that in free immersion. And this one happened at 42, 43 meters. And it was 1 meter deeper than, sorry, the dive I was attempting was 1 meter deeper than a depth I'd done with one of the most beautiful dives of my life the day before. So not the day before, like 3 days before. So yeah, it definitely couldn't be explained by hypoxia, by low oxygen. And the theory is that, without sidetracking too much, that it was high partial pressure of carbon dioxide. And that incident, I'm very lucky to still be here. It's thanks to my safety team that I am, but it definitely kind of caused me to stop and think about what I'm doing, and the fact that I was there with my family, and I would have left behind like a 1-year-old child. So since then, I've implemented much stronger safety protocols on all dives, whether training or in a competition, and tried to also provide for what we don't know, because this incident is probably caused by something that we weren't even aware was a risk, and maybe there's other risks out there that we're not aware of. So trying to provide for unknown unknowns kind of thing. That's probably the biggest change.
Cool. Next question is from Brandon, and he says, what is the most important piece of advice you could give to a casual diver that wants to become competitive?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot, and I never get tired of saying that it's all about technique. In this case, like concentrate on your technique, and everything else will come. So most people don't have access to depth consistently. You might be able to go out on a weekend or something or a deep dive, but you're lucky to be able to do that. But most people also do have access to a swimming pool. And you can make huge progress by focusing on your technique, in particular, making it very specific. So swimming underwater dynamic laps as part of training tables is best, because you can have a high intensity with it and do a lot of volume. But really focusing on your tech, even if you're doing a hypercapnic or a hypoxic table, you should still be thinking about, like, how can I improve my arm stroke, my leg kick, my body position, everything about it. So yeah, that's the number one thing, is to focus on your technique, because if you make a gain there, then it'll apply to all your dives from that point on for the rest of your life. Whereas the rest can kind of come and go with training over.
Cool. All right, so we have what's something common you see people doing that is bad for training, or bad, like what's something common you see people doing in training that's just bad for them or bad for progress?
Oh yeah, that's a question I haven't had before. That's a good one. There's many things I could pick up on. I guess I'm a picky person, but one of the things that I see often is people who perhaps, I mean, at all levels as well, people who concentrate too much on just doing one deep dive. Like if they have access to depth, doing one deep dive and then ending the session, or maybe just like a couple of exhales and a deep dive, and that's it. And sure, there's times when that applies. I talked about like tapering towards a competition. There you want to be focusing on your recovery and your rest. But if you don't have a competition or anything to build up to, or if it's a long way in the future, like it's a month away, then I'd really recommend you do a decent volume of training in the water. So not just one deep dive, but do some exhales to work on your equalization and stuff. And then also do some kind of technique dives where you're just concentrating on one or two elements, working out your buoyancy, comparing different aspects of technique to see what's most efficient. And here, using software like Apnealyzer or MacDive to analyze your dives is really, really key. And also doing depth training tables. So repeats of, say, 20 or 25 meters with fairly short recoveries between them, so that you do that multiple times and you expose yourself to all these different elements of a depth dive that you wouldn't normally train that often. So the turn, the duck dive, the free fall in particular. Like if you say you have a week to spend depth training and you do one deep dive a day, you'll probably in that whole week total a time of maybe 3 or 4 minutes spent in free fall. Whereas if you're doing a lot of training tables as well, where you have like a few seconds, 10, 15 seconds here or there in each of those repetitions of the training table, then over time you'll be exposed to that free fall, the technique of a free fall, and everything that comes with it a lot more. And you'll be able to work on things with your position, your relaxation, your equalization, that you wouldn't be exposed to as much if you're just doing one deep dive. So yeah, if you get depth, make sure you take advantage of it.
Mm-hmm. All right, the next one is, and I can't pronounce the name, I'm sorry, it's a very long name and there's a lot of letters. But the question is there a more or a most effective way that you can train your CO2 tolerance for deep dives specifically?
I think CO2 tolerance is the same for deep dives as it is in the pool. I'm not sure, but I suspect that it's more or less the same. So if you have trained your CO2 tolerance in dry tables or in pool tables, then that should translate into benefits in depth as well. So I would suggest just doing whatever you have access to or you can fit into your schedule, and that should probably work. Sometimes it can help to do hangs at depth in order to develop the skills of relaxation in depth, which is correlated with CO2 tolerance in depth. So being able to, say, for example, go to 30 or 40 or 50 meters and sit at that depth and assume a position that's completely relaxed. So I have like a way of kind of wrapping my leg around the rope and then hooking my arms in so I can completely relax everything and shut down. And that's a really important skill that's often overlooked in depth training. And so when you start to feel the urge to breathe, treating that as a signal to relax deeper into that state. And you may even start to feel CO2 narcosis at that depth towards the end of the hang. For me, those have been a really good way to work on both relaxation and for the depth that I go to where CO2 narcosis becomes acute, working on tolerance to that as well.
Cool. You don't want too much tolerance to that CO2 narcosis though, right?
Well, it can be good and bad. Like bad CO2 narcosis is not a fun game.
The next question is, it's actually putting a bunch of everyone's questions, which is, do you train static breath hold, and do you think static breath hold is good training or has a place for training in no fins?
Yeah, when most people say static breath hold, they're referring to inhale kind of in the pool as long as you can hold your breath. No,
I mean, like maybe let's just it's like a varying like static breath hold as far as a discipline. So not necessarily if they're just going for, you know, I suppose like varying tables in the discipline of not moving as you hold your breath on full lungs, exhale. Let's go whole smorgasbord.
Well, the answer to that question would be yes, I do a lot. And I've over the years, it's been one of the kind of main staples is full exhale static breath holds that I do dry because I can do that pretty much anywhere. You kind of want to be ventilated, quiet room and everything because otherwise you start to overheat, or I do. But yeah, full exhale static apnea has always been a big one for me. And the reason I do it on a full exhale is because that more accurately replicates the sensation in your torso that you have during a deep free dive. And at depth, even after the first 5-10 meters, your lung volumes are compressed to half or less of their initial volume. So you never have that bursting sensation of completely full lungs apart from when you're on the surface starting the dive. So yeah, I chose, that's one of the reasons why I chose to do them all on exhale. Another reason is that I can work on blocking the contractions using specific methods. And it seems to, yeah, pay dividends in my training over the years. I also sometimes do full lung static apnea as well, but not as commonly. It's normally because I have to compete in, say, a pool world championship competition. There's a period where I've been doing what they call morning statics, where you just kind of wake up, take a leak, and then lie down and without any warm up, without any kind of preparation, do a full, as long as you can, static apnea. So I was toying around with that as well, but didn't seem to kind of benefit as much from that maybe as I did from the exhale statics. And I also do exhale static tables where it's just full exhale, as long as you can, breathe in, breathe out, full exhale, and as long as you can. So 10 times is that. So basically 10 exhale statics with one breath between them.
You know, it's really interesting. Well, I've never said this to you before, but I sat down with a group of divers once, and we analysed your performances over like the last 10 years, and your biggest performance years always corresponded to when you were doing static in competition.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we started training static more. Anyway.
2010, 2008.
Team World Championships.
But 2016 was one of my biggest years as well, and I didn't do any static then.
No, that's true. It was more like, I think, like from,
early on.
Yeah, from like 2000, early 2000s to I think when you did your 101, and then a little bit further from there, and then the numbers didn't work. But anyway, I thought it was interesting.
Full thought.
Know
more about my training than I do.
No, just little bits, Will, just little bits and pieces. I just do the right kind of stalking. So next question is about diet. So this is from Christina, one of our patrons, and she says she would love to know more about your diet, and if you consider what she refers to proper diet and nutrition to be an important part of freediving.
Yeah, it is. And increasingly as we get older, I think diet becomes more and more relevant. You can get away with a lot when you're young, but it becomes more delicate after maybe you turn 30 or 35 or so. But even before then, I was already switched over to pretty much eliminating refined kind of processed foods, refined sugars and anything. I'd stopped drinking caffeine and alcohol, other than when I was like at the very end of the season celebrating, like after the World Champs or something. So yeah, kind of that was the main things I was doing early on. But then more recently, I switched over to a plant-based diet, and that seemed to make a big difference in terms of the ability to recover after diving. So before, I would do a deep dive in the morning and then come home and have a big meal with like steak or chicken or something, and then crash out and like have to have a nap for an hour or two in the afternoon. And these days, I don't need that as often at all. And sometimes I can, even after a maximal deep dive in the morning, still do a second training session in the evening. And I attribute that, I think, towards diet. So one of the kind of the key things for me seems to be slamming my body with like a shake, a smoothie after the training that it's just kind of like pure antioxidants pretty much. So I normally throw in like the frozen banana, a coconut, like all the coconut water from a fresh coconut, and a big slab of aloe. So I have aloe plants in my garden, and you know, the big fat leaves, I'll basically just fillet that to get all the green skin off. So you've just got this big slab of jelly. And all the liquid in the smoothie is from the aloe and the coconut water. And then I throw in, for powders, it's like spirulina, cacao, beetroot juice powder, maca powder. What else? Hemp protein. So hemp is my main source of supplemental protein. And throw all that in, and it turns out to be like almost a liter of smoothie, and it's really kind of thick. But as I'm drinking that after training, it's almost like I can feel my body just kind of soaking it up like a sponge. And yeah, if I don't do that, then I get kind of irritable, like kind of burnt out, and I'll crash out and have to take a nap, and I feel exhausted that evening and the next day. So that seems to be like critical for me, is getting that big smoothie in after training. And actually, there's a company called Brenos in France that's produced a product that copies what I use in my smoothie. It's called Trubridge. They sell it, and I've had it. It's pretty good. So yeah, that seems to be the most important part of my diet now. That and being plant-based and pretty much just sticking with kind of like whole foods and the sensible stuff. I still eat, I must kind of make a disclaimer that I still eat seafood, but it's pretty much all seafood that I've caught myself. I know it's like fresh, sourced, local, sustainable. And even then, it's still not that often. It's like once, twice a week, I think.
Oh, the vegans are coming for you now, they will. This is the last question, and then we're going to go to the questions that we have from you guys here in the chat. So the last question from our patrons is basically, what does your stretching routine look like? And I know that must change throughout the season. So maybe just, I suppose, pick a time frame and maybe talk about that.
Typically, I'll do, as preparation for a pool session or for a depth session, I'll do kind of 20 minutes of body stretching and 20 minutes of lung stretching. And the body stretching exercises are kind of a mix of like asanas from yoga and sports stretches. And the lung stretching exercises are all the ones that I've been kind of developing for the last 15 years that in particular, target creating negative intrathoracic pressure. So replicating the effect of pressure on the torso. But also positive intrathoracic pressure through packing. So exhale packing, inhale packing, but a lot of specific exercises and movements and combinations of maneuvers that really allow you to generate a negative intrathoracic pressure that's potentially even superior to what I would experience in a 100-meter dive. There's a couple of exercises that I do that I feel are more challenging, that create more negative pressure in my lungs than any dive I've ever done in my life. So you can work on that pretty well, even dry. So yeah, that's kind of most of what I do in terms of stretching.
Cool. All right. So now this is a question from Mark, and he says, you don't seem to use a freediving nose clip, but a swimming nose clip. Does that mean your equalization technique is more hands-free than Frenzel?
So I can hands-free equalize if I'm diving with a mask. And that allows me to use these, I think they're synchronized swimming nose clips. Well, that's typically what they're used for swimming, synchronized swimming. Because they don't seal your nose that well, if it's difficult for you to equalize, if you have to blow quite hard to equalize, then chances are this nose clip won't work for you because you'll leak air out of your nose. They don't seal it well enough. But because I can equalize hands-free, it means that I don't need much pressure to open my ears. And so this kind of a nose clip is fine. And it's just less drag, better streamlining, looks better than the chunky ones that some of the others use. And if you lose one, they're only like a couple of dollars a pop, so no biggie.
This question goes to, how many packs do you do for a 100-meter no-fin dive, or just a max no-fin dive? And do you think there is any risk in packing to max?
Yeah, over the years, I've looking back on my notes, I realized that I've kind of gradually increased my packs. I think when I first started, I was only doing maybe 10, 12 at the most. And now these days I do close to 50. And yes, there is a risk of damaging your structures, lungs, trachea, through overpacking. And we've actually seen this happen. There was a guy who came to the Bahamas one year, who was doing crazy stuff. He was doing max packing and then salute to the sun yoga moves, so crazy kind of movements with overpressurized lungs, which is very, very foolish. Don't try that yourself. So yes, it is possible to have that kind of an injury through packing. But if you've developed flexibility over a long time and you've kind of very gradually increased the amount that you're packing, and you always stretch before any depth session, then I feel like listening to your body, you'll understand how much is safe and when you're starting to get close to an unsafe amount.
Cool. So I'm going to combine two questions now. because we had one that was basically said what goes on, goes through your mind before a dive. And then the other one was what's going on in your mind when you're like 60, 70 meters down.
Basically one brain cell talking to the other, trying to figure out when to turn around, or I don't know. There's not a lot. Ideally, the more that we can slow down our mind during a free dive, the better, because the mind is like this oxygen greedy. It just goes through your oxygen stores like nothing else. I think at rest, we consume the brain consumes 20% of your available oxygen, and it weighs about 2% of your body weight. So that's a kind of a factor of 10 times as much as the rest of the tissue. So if you can slow down those processes, neurological processes, then the idea is that would also slow down your consumption of oxygen in the brain. And it also means that you're less liable to stress yourself out or kind of give yourself reason to panic underwater, do anything silly. So yes, trying to slow down the brain. And the best way to do that is to get to a place where everything is pre-programmed so that you don't have to think about anything during the dive. You've pre-programmed, whether by a lot of repetition, so you've done so many dives to similar depths, or in training with training tables, that kind of thing, that every movement, every maneuver is programmed into your muscle memory and you don't have to think about it. And you can also program through visualization. So before the dive, just visualizing every step. And when we visualize, we're just kind of writing a script for our subconscious for it to follow during the dive. So you're giving it the script, saying, okay, this is what I want you to do. And that way you can turn your own mind off and let it play out the script. So yeah, ideally, if that all goes to plan, you won't have to think about anything during the dive itself.
Cool. All right, RTE says, tell us more about VB 2021. What did you find was the best and conversely the most challenging thing about this competition or this year's competition?
For me personally?
Yeah.
Yeah, this year, I've talked to you about this. It was a tough one, for reasons I won't go into completely. But yeah, not just COVID, but also coming back after a break in VB for a couple of years, not having funding. So we got into kind of dire straits with funding it, only 2 or 3 weeks out from the competition. So all of that challenges with the team and everything else. So that meant that it was the most stressful period probably of my life, and it was tough for me to do any kind of dives. At the start of the competition, my level was, I don't know, way below it was what it was a month before that. So a month before the competition, I was doing dives to within a couple of meters of the world record in free immersion, and I was on track to attempt the world record in the event. And that just took a nosedive. Like as soon as all the stress started piling up and things started going wrong, I couldn't even do dives to 10 meters from the world record. So yeah, but it got a little easier towards the end of the event as it started to get kind of momentum and the team were working well. But the damage for me had been done, and I still wasn't able to compete at my top level, even at the end of the event.
Cool. Guys, by the way, we've reached the end of all our little questions here. So if you have questions, plonk them here. We've got 11 minutes before Will's wife steals him from us. What's your recommendation for the best freediving physiology source of knowledge? A book suggestion, perhaps?
I don't think there's anything that's been really, there's books out there, but there's nothing kind of like conclusive that I would be comfortable with recommending, because I mean it's a science that we're learning as we go, right? And I probably a good amount of the stuff that I'm teaching might be erroneous as well. So I've tried to combine what I know about physiology into a like a webinar series that I gave, Freediving 102 last year, which is still available for anyone who's interested. But aside from that, I would suggest just kind of doing research of like forums, and back in the day it was like Deeper Blue had this forum where we'd kind of trawl through that and bouncing ideas and stuff, but now there isn't really an equivalent of that, and I don't feel like there's books specifically on physiology which really get it right. So yeah, sorry.
I hear there's a good one called Oxygen or something like that, right? That you should all
Well, that's not that's
Yeah,
written by a first-time author. It's a bit of a I don't know, it's an autobiography, so there's stuff in, like I talk about the physiology of freediving and what I understand of it, but you'd have to endure a lot of random stories about free dives and stuff to get to that.
It'd be very hard for you to endure it, guys. So just to clarify, we had some questions before saying people were like, what's VB? VB is Vertical Blue, which is like it's the biggest freediving comp in the world. It's much bigger than the World Championships and more important too. So it's a big deal.
Do you reckon we'll see any world records set at the World Championships this year, either CMAS or ADA?
Nah, not really. I mean, there'll be some CMAS world records set, I'm sure, but not.
Well, no, the CMAS world records are now all
of them.
Pretty much. I don't know. It's hard to keep track.
Yeah.
Absolute records. Let's
say. No, I don't think they will, to be honest. I don't think the girls are going to go for it again. Oh, maybe Alessia will do like a no fins one or something like that.
That's the only, yeah. Incidentally, now all of the world records in all disciplines, all the competitive disciplines in depth, are held by dives at Dean's Blue Hole.
Yeah, that's cool, isn't it?
Interesting.
Well, it's a very special place. There was a good question up here. It was an interesting question, something very different than we've had before so far. So it basically says, what would you recommend to someone who has had repetitive throat squeezes on shallow dives, shallower than 30 meters in 20 degrees Celsius water?
So I haven't ever had this problem myself, and I typically have had an easy route with equalization in general. So it's hard for me to, I can't speak from experience, but what I can say is that even though I've never had problems with equalization or lung squeeze, I still do every day, sometimes often twice a day, these sessions of lung stretching exercise that I talked about, like 20 minutes or so. And I credit that not only with kind of a good adaptation in terms of pressure adaptation, but also in terms of relaxation at depth. And those two they go hand in hand. Relaxation and equalization, you can't separate them. So yeah, I would recommend anyone who has difficulty with that kind of thing, there's some underlying problem there, and it would require me actually diving with you to try and trace down what it is. But chances are it can be resolved by focusing on flexibility and relaxation at depth. So flexibility in terms of doing these kind of lung stretching exercises and also stretching for the body in general. And then relaxation at depth, just working on, yeah, like hangs or dives, exhale dives, free falls, and always trying to like let go of tension as you go down. So becoming more relaxed the deeper you go, rather than conversely. Typically in beginners, we'll see more tension being built as they go deeper, and it kind of really comes to the fore as they approach their target depth. Whereas we want to experience the opposite of that. We want to become more relaxed the deeper we go.
All right, lucky last question, which is very simply, what is next for William Trubridge?
Yeah, next is my number 2 child, which is due in a week. So that's kind of like occupying every resource and every most thoughts at the moment. After that, we're going to be here in New Zealand until the rest of the year, and then back to Japan and Bahamas for more training. I still kind of have unfinished business with this re-immersion world record because I was supposed to attempt it again this year during Vertical Blue. I was in good shape. I feel like I can do dives to the late 120s. So yeah, I'd like to train and have another crack at that. But at the same time, I'm not married to the idea, and I have a few other projects that I can't disclose around kind of depth or attempts.
103.
So to get back to those kind of depths and no fins, like I'd have to just like set up camp for a year pretty much, and yeah, I'd love to do it, but now with the family and everything, it's more difficult. So we'll see. I'd love to have another shot at nudging that a little bit deeper before
to put it out of reach.
Yeah, but we'll see. It's a tall order, I think, to even just to get back to those depths.
Well, the men's no fins record is, in my opinion, by far is pushed further than any other discipline between, of all the sexes and all the disciplines, the men's no fins is by far pushed the furthest.
Thank you. I mean, I dedicated myself to it for like 10 years solid, pretty much. And I don't think that's been done by other athletes in disciplines. So I would hope to have done my best in it, for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, guys, thank you, Will, so much for coming. Before we skedaddle, I'm going to plug some things. All right. Don't think you just get to come here and don't listen to my plugs. All right. So if you are keen to come to, so basically everyone that supports me on Patreon gets access to 4 weekly training sessions. They're remote training sessions that we do dry. We have a big group from all over the world that do it. So if you are keen to join that, just head to my Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/Adam Freediver. And Will, if people want to train with you or get in touch with you or do some coaching with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So either contact me via email at through my website, williamtrubridge.com, and there are some things I'm going to be doing next year. Typically, I don't teach the courses at Vertical Blue myself anymore, but for next year, there's a couple of like camps or trips that I'm going to be running. So yeah, if you contact me through the website, then I can put you on the mailing list and you can receive info on all of those.
Cool. We're also totally going to do Deep Week, Dean's Blue Hole after Vertical Blue next year.
That's one of the things. I'm just going to move out to the other room.
We're going to let you go anyway, because I know you've got to run. Mate, thanks so much for joining us. And guys, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, have a bloody wonderful day.
Thank you, Adam.
Pleasure. See you guys. All right, I'm going to end the meeting now. So yeah, hope you enjoyed and thanks so much. And next week, we have Guillaume Neri coming along to do this pretty much the same thing. So that's going to be fun. So if you came for that, I'll make an event and all the la-di-da as well. So anyway, have a great day, night, morning, all that jazz, guys. See you later. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe by pressing this little circular thing down here.
Also, check out this video.
Or you might want to check out this video because you might like it too.